Welcome to Northern Powerhouses, our business success stories series of interviews where we discuss with local business leaders their backgrounds, their successes and challenges, and what's really driving them forwards. And this morning, I'm delighted to have with us Tim Wright, who's the co-founder and director at SatSense. So, Tim, firstly, welcome and thank you for coming on board. And if you'd like to introduce yourself and SatSense and tell people how you help them and the great things you do, that would be wonderful.
Great, thanks, and thanks for the invitation to join you on this podcast. I'm looking forward to the chat. My name's Tim Wright. I'm actually, my main job is I'm a professor at the University of Leeds. So I do research into earthquakes, volcanoes all over the world, primarily using satellite imagery. And one thing, a particular bit of technology that we've been developing in the academic world with my colleague Andy Hooper over the last 20 years or more, is to use satellite radars to actually measure how the ground moves very precisely. And we've been using that for mapping volcanoes that are swelling before they erupt, for looking at faults and to see how they're building up stresses that might lead to earthquakes, etc. But we realized that there was an opportunity to use this technology in other more I don't want to say mundane, but more kind of practical applications closer to home. So thinking about water pipelines that might break because the soil is shrinking and swelling, or bits of embankment on a railway track that might be sliding down due to landslides, or even on an individual home owner kind of basis that your house might be subsiding because your neighbor's trees got too big and things like that. So we realized we've got this fantastic technology that could be used to monitor all of these kinds of applications. And there was also a kind of real, in the last 6-7 years, there's been a real growth in the number of satellites up there that are capable of doing this technology. And in particular, a European satellite called Sentinel-1, which we use heavily in SatSense. And that provides free global data every few days for the UK. And we're able to really change the way we can use this data to provide a kind of service. And so we realized there was this opportunity there. So we worked with the university's spin-out group and eventually founded SatSense. We started going properly with some investment in 2018. And we've been going from strength to strength since then.
Incredible. I mean, it just so you're able to use satellite imagery to detect. I really get this. Funny enough, I've been lucky enough many years ago to go to the Himalaya, and I believe they rise by about 6 centimeters a year. I think they're still rising. Yeah,
it's maybe a little bit less than that, but it's that kind of order. There's a collision of there. It's like 4 or 5 centimeters of convergence, and that leads to maybe 1 centimeter a year of the mountains going up, something like that.
And of course, it's consistent landslides. I'm sure the rainfall contributes to that, but I would imagine this movement is creating that. But now you're talking about going down from sort of very big things into into houses. So literally the footage of a house. That's quite incredible.
Yeah, and we're talking about tiny movements as well. So depending on the satellite, with Sentinel-1, the smallest we can go to is it's a kind of a rectangular patch on the ground that's about 5 meters in one dimension and 20 meters in the other dimension. Okay. So it's a moderately sized house. But with some other satellites, there are higher resolution commercial satellites. We have to pay for the data, where you can get 1 meter resolution or even better with some of these more modern satellites. And then we're measuring, the real magic is that we're measuring movements that are as small as a millimeter per year. So these are absolutely tiny movements that you can track with these satellites. So,
I'm sorry, you're gonna blow my tiny brain in a minute. So you can do, from a satellite, you can monitor a millimeter of change in distance. Wowzers.
Yeah, incredible. So it relies on, I mean, it amazes me that it works sometimes, because even though I've been doing this since the 90s, we've been working on this technology. But essentially what you're doing is you're sending a radar wave down, and you're measuring how long it takes that radar wave to get back, essentially. And we do some tricks. You can't know exactly the distance because the radar wave gets slowed down by the atmosphere, and there's a whole bunch of things you have to correct for. but you can measure differential movement. So you can, although you don't know the absolute time or distance between the satellite and the ground precisely, what you can know very precisely is changes in that distance over time, and also changes between neighboring pixels. So it kind of in space, because a lot of the effects kind of cancel out. The atmosphere is relatively consistent in space, and so we can and then by tracking individual points through time, we can also get rid of a lot of the other noise effects. So we can build these beautiful time series that show all sorts of things. And the real innovation in SatSense is that rather than, so this technology has been around a while, there's been other commercial companies doing and providing data. And typically in the past, the business model was, somebody, a mining company would say, we need some data for our mine. The company would go, the provider would go away, buy the data, process the data, maybe 3 or 4 weeks later, provide them a product, charge them a lot of money for that product, because it's kind of one-off bespoke processing. Now, what we can do with Sentinel-1, because the data is free, we decided we're just going to process the whole country continuously. So every time there's a new satellite acquisition, the computers download that automatically, churn it away, extend our time series. So we have a continually updated map for the whole country. And we can have a look online at some point if you want, and I can share my screen and show you some of that if that's interesting.
That would be cool.
And we can show you some of the kinds of things we see. But the advantage of that is, the idea was that costs us, X pounds to do, but we can sell it over and over and over again, and we don't have to sell it. We can sell it much cheaper, so we can sell it to an individual house owner level. So and we could sell it to a whole local authority. We can extract data along a railway line and try and develop products using that. And so making a much more, we're trying to really open up new markets to people who weren't using this data before, people who couldn't afford it, people who needed the regular updates, those kind of applications where it wouldn't work before.
That's fascinating. And I've worked previously with a meteorological company that uses both historical and current data to predict weather. And one of the things I remember they often said was it's asking the right question to know that, we've got all this information. It's how that has a relevance and value to an individual, and that's quite a difficult connection, I guess, with the person who might use it to actually explain the value of the information that we have.
And it is a real challenge, particularly with a technology like this, which first of all you have to convince people that it works, and that it's real. Then you have to try to work with customers to work out how they're going to use it in their regular workflow. So how is it going to save Network Rail money? And Network Rail spend a lot of money on infrastructure monitoring. They have something like 200,000 earthworks that they manage. A lot of those are kind of Victorian age. I think they have 30,000 bridges or something like that. And so a lot of those some of those they know are moving, and they have ground-based instruments that they use to monitor that movement. Some of them they don't know are moving. Some of them they just look at once a year with a kind of visual inspection. And so what we can do is and we're working with Network Rail to try and develop algorithms that use our data, provide them with information that says, yes, it's fine, this is stable, no, this other site is moving, or where they know there's movement, to try and come up with it's obviously cheaper to monitor it from satellites. It gives you a different kind of observation. It can be more spatially continuous than you can do on the ground. We can also, if something starts, if they notice something moving now, because we've been collecting data from Sentinel-1 since 2015, we can look back at the last 7 years and say, actually, it started moving 6 months ago. And that can help understand what the causes of the movement are and things like that. So it's as you say, it's about working with customers, understanding what they want, what they need,
Yeah.
and what their pain points are. It's kind of, I think, the kind of usual kind of business ideas that I, as an academic, I'm just kind of learning about, really trying to how you work on these things. Yeah,
it's the connection, isn't it? Because ultimately, in any business, it's not about what we do; it's about what problems we solve. And and it's if we don't by mastering and understanding the problems we solve and marketing those, that's what people are interested in. It's not what we do; it's the problems, their problems that we solve. So I can totally understand how that might be a challenge, but I mean, but then from what you said, the many opportunities and problems that you solve for what you do.
Yeah, and I think most people. The other thing is because most people don't want they don't want the raw data, the numbers. They want the answers, right?
Yes.
And so, is my dam moving, or is it stable? Is the landslide? Has the landslide moved because of the recent rains we've had? Those kind of problems. And if you're buying a house, you want to know, is my house suffering some subsidence? And actually, one of our early contracts, we have a nice deal with a company called Groundsure, and they provide when you buy a house, you get a monitoring report, an environmental report on your house. It has a bunch of things in there. One of them is about subsidence, and they've previously looked at geology. They've looked at your proximity to known mine workings and things. And now you get a little bit that says satellite monitoring says your house is fine, it's stable, or no, the satellite monitoring has picked up some movement, and it's just a kind of red or green flag in the initial report, and then they can go in and get a more detailed report. And so every time Groundsure sell one of those reports, they're automatically generated. They query our database, they get the information back. I think we have to do it within a second. They have to send them the information on that particular property, and then it's built in. They build it into their report, and we get a small fee for each one of those. But it's and that's kind of a recurring revenue, which is fantastic, of course.
Lovely. Wowzers, that's so cool. So obviously we've talked a little bit about your academic going into business in depth and that process. So maybe it'd be great to talk a little bit about your background and how you that merge into how you got into business. And obviously we know why this particular one, but how that occurred.
Yeah. So I was how far do we go back? So I started a master's degree in the 90s in remote sensing, when remote sensing was sort of starting to take off using satellites. And that was, just by chance, I bumped into somebody who talked to me about it and was very passionate about what satellites could do. And then during that master's, I heard about this technique using satellites to measure ground movement had just been invented by some scientists jointly in France and the US. And I was really excited about what could be done with that. And a PhD came up looking at that in Oxford, where the application there was about earthquakes. And I worked on, was one of the first people to use this technology for both mapping and modeling earthquakes, but also I was the first person to show that you can measure this stress building up around tectonic faults. So we can actually see the slow plate motion building up. So it's like you're watching the elastic band stretching before it snaps in an earthquake. And there's lots of hopes about what you might be able to do with that, with earthquake prediction and things like that. And I think a lot of those hopes we're still working on. I think short-term prediction isn't going to be there from what we do, but we can, by mapping where this build-up happens, we can start to prioritize where you might want to make sure your building codes are properly set up and things like that. So so that's been my academic primary lead, but I've also done work on volcanoes. I've worked in Ethiopia, worked in other volcanoes around the world, and done a lot of thinking about those kind of problems. And then I moved to Leeds in 2007 initially as an independent research fellow, just kept carrying on building my research career, and then as a lecturer, eventually becoming a professor. And then another key event was my colleague Andy Hooper joined. He probably joined about 8 years ago, I think, and he had a real kind of deeper expertise in the actual algorithm development. So my expertise was really about applying the in-cell technology to the tectonic problems. But Andy had done a lot of work developing algorithms that could extract more information, higher resolution, more accurately than other people could do. And he developed the leading kind of academic software that he made available to people. And when he came to Leeds, he started working on some kind of the next generation of algorithms. And then, we talked early on about the opportunities. We saw Sentinel-1 coming on the horizon, and so that was really, again, the trigger for doing this business development. And the university, the processes aren't quick in universities. I think we were quite keen just to get going, but the university is, I think, it's quite cautious, but I mean, it has a lot of spin outs at the university, but it wants to make sure they're successful.
Yes.
So there's a lot of work in developing the ideas. The university was able to put some seed money so we could hire some people just to build some demo products, show that this could work, and then we can use that to pitch to investors. So that was how it got. So it was certainly not a plan to go into business or set up a spin out. It was just, it felt like an opportunity that was there it's too good really to miss. We had the right people in place, we had the right technologies, Andy developed some of these new algorithms, and so it was, and the university was supportive, and so once we got the investment, we were really able to kind of hit the ground running then with a product that was reasonably well developed.
Brilliant. And I, obviously, as you know, as a sort of business coaching organisation, it's the business part that I'm really interested in. But I mean, I'm fascinated by the technology, and I'm interested in what the biggest challenge you've overcome in bringing this technology into a business environment.
Yeah, I think part of the challenge is, we've already talked about this challenge that what do people actually want, and there's, I think, a lot of companies out there, tech companies, there's a lot of tech push. So you're pushing the technology into a market that doesn't really want it or isn't necessarily ready for it. And I think we probably suffer from that a little bit as well. So I think the tech development, I think the main challenges are what we've really focused on, and we've got some great developers in-house. So, one of them, the lead developer, is former PhD student of Andy's, and he helped develop this next generation of codes, a guy called Carsten Spans, and he's been fantastic at kind of pushing those algorithms, but actually turning an academic code into a robust business code, making it efficient. We don't, in academia, we're not so worried about the efficiency. We want it to run. And we want if it takes a week rather than a few hours, it's not a great disaster necessarily. But with business, you want it to run efficiently. You need to be able to sort it out on where are we going to run the computers, all these kind of problems. How do we guarantee to ground sure that we can deliver an answer within a second? I think we're on a 99% of the time we have to do that, otherwise they start cutting our fee. So it's solving those kind of problems. How do we then serve the data to clients? We have I'll show you the interactive portal in a bit, and we can access all of that data set really, really quickly. So there are hundreds of millions of data points in here, and each of those data points has hundreds of timestamps on it. So it's an absolutely massive data set. But I can, through this portal, go there and zoom in on your house and tell you, whether your house is stable or not, and we can do that very, very quickly, or we can look at anywhere in the country. So solving those kind of it's engineering problems really, rather than the science problems. But we've got a good team, a growing team in house that does that.
Brilliant.
But yeah, and then I think so. That's the tech problems, and then I think it's convincing. I think what surprised our CEO who came in, I think a week before the first lockdown. So I guess that's another challenge, of course.
Yes.
But one of the things that surprised him is just how long the sales cycle is for this kind of data set, because it really can be years from from the first contact. So if we can get a deal, we've just done a deal with an overseas utility company, a water utility company, but that was just under a year, and that felt like that was fast. But it's just because it takes that time to convince people that just for people to understand what the technology can do, to get some confidence in it. Other people, there are sectors who use it all the time. So kind of the mining industry uses this data a lot.
Okay.
They're very comfortable in just taking.
They would get it,
and that can be very quick as well. So and you can, we have on our website now, you can even draw a box and stick your credit card details in and get a download almost instantly. So that we find actually most people don't want that. They want the relationship. They want to talk to people. They want to understand the data. So
it's interesting where it becomes, it's that thing where it becomes a service, as not an advisory service, not just a data or information provision, and it's where we are on that agenda. I think the concept that was given to me at the start, and I struggled to get my head around it at the start, although it's very simple, but is very relevant to this, is that when people go to a hardware store and buy a drill, they don't actually want a drill, they want a hole in the wall.
That's
and
right.
It's what does the hole in the wall look like for the particular person, and often they're using different. Wowzers, that's really fascinating.
And I think we've been on this journey, and I think we'd like all of our customers to be like Groundshaw. I mean, Groundshaw we were talking to again for years before we finally signed the deal. We were talking to them before one of the tentative contracts, that the discussions we had before to convince the investors. But they're a great example, because we've done the work, we've worked out what they want, we've provided something that's not the raw data but is information. Is this house stable or is it not stable? And if it's not stable, what are the things that we're picking up in a bit more detail? So we give them what they want, and then that's done now completely automatically. We get a few queries a month that are specific. We don't really understand. A customer's asked about this particular report on their house, so we get a few of those every month, but it's largely completely automatic. And we'd like to take all customers on that kind of journey, really, so that it's not all, it's moving away. We do a fair amount of what you'd probably call old-fashioned consultancy. We provide the data, we interpret it. Yes, it's quite labor intensive.
It is,
but that's great. We're happy to do that work, but the more that we can automate and scale, it just makes it much more scalable, and we can think about going overseas, and all of those kind of markets can be opened up.
I feel like I have a level of understanding that I wouldn't expect to have, because so working with the meteorological company as an example, they did a lot of work in the event insurance arena. So that's insuring a Glastonbury or a sports event for excessive weather events, too much rain, frozen ground, and they don't really want to know what's the weather on that day. They just want to know what's the likelihood of more than 10 centimeters of rainfall, or 10 millimeters or whatever it would be. And so it's the platform or the interface that interprets that for them in the way they really don't care whether the sun's shining. They just want to know if the weather.
Absolutely. And it's the same for, if you think about a water pipeline, then we don't, actually the ground movements, it's not just the ground movement that matters. So, if your whole town is subsiding and there are places or uplifting, and there are places, particularly kind of in the coal mining areas, not far from here, where you've got some really big signals. But actually, if your whole town is sinking or rising, it doesn't really matter, because the pipe moves with it, right? So what matters is if that pipe is bending, if you're, and so we've been having to work quite closely with the water utility companies and our data. So we use their failures information from past failures to try and work out what it is in our data that causes the failure. And we're using, of course, machine learning and all those kind of modern tricks as well to try and make those connections. And it's amazing, actually. We find for pipelines that they have existing models that do that are based on the age of the pipe, the soil, etc. And they do reasonably well. But if we use the satellite data by itself, we can do just as well as with all their other information. And if we combine the two, we're doing significantly better than just what they had before. And so that can then, of course, this is obviously very topical there. Water leaks, etc., with the droughts we had this summer, and
absolutely,
and the hose pipe bans, etc. But anything they can do to reduce leaks is really they're really keen to do that. And they're only replacing. I think they replace 0.1% of their pipeline in a sort of annual basis. And so it's all about targeting that 0.1% to be the ones most likely to fail, and that's where our data can be really, really powerful.
Amazing. Well, I do feel, although there was lots of other questions to ask, it would be great to perhaps if you could see what we're talking about. I'm totally fascinated.
Sure.
Let me I'll pass over the screen to you. This is first time we've done this on these interviews, so hopefully it will work.
Excellent.
If you'd like, you should be able to share your screen now. That would be
great. Let's see if that works.
Wonderful. Yeah.
So can you see that?
It's just coming. Yes, I can see it. Wow. Okay.
Great. Yes. So you're seeing the map of the country, and great. So what you're seeing here is map of the country, and it's covered by this kind of mat of white and coloured dots, and those are our data. So we don't get one thing about the technology. We don't get observations everywhere because we need the ground surface scattering characteristics to be fairly constant in time. So actually, if a farmer plows their fields, for example, that disturbs the scattering characteristics. So so we can't make measurements in vegetated areas very well, but in areas with relatively poor vegetation or urban areas. So you can see, if you look on the distribution of these white dots, you can see the towns, you can see the roads and the railways are coming up quite nicely. Let me just put some labels on here so we know where we are. So there's Nottingham. We can zoom in on here, and then each of these. So I'm zooming on this red area, and we'll see it'll refresh in a second. We're seeing each of these red dots is a measurement point, and then we can actually go and draw a box around those measurement points, and what will pop up. Hopefully, can you see this time series that's popped up?
I can. Yeah.
And so what you see here actually is quite a really interesting one. I've happened to have picked here. It was stable, and then something's happened in late 2018. It's dropped, and then it's actually been slowly recovering since then. So that's one example. I think this is a mining area. Typically these in mining areas it's not necessarily steady with time because and of course most of the mining has stopped. But what we're often seeing is changes in how they're doing the pumping. Occasionally it can be underground. Something's collapsed underground, and so you get a sudden subsidence, but often it's about the water management and how they're dealing with that. If we go to another good example, one place on the south coast near Folkestone, here's Folkestone. So if I just change that to that. So this is the main railway line that runs along the coast here. And what you can see, even in the background satellite image, you can see this kind of white breaks in the cliff here. And actually, this is a big landslide. And Network Rail have known about this landslide for a long time. It's one of the biggest landslides in Europe. And what you can see with the satellite data again here is you've got some red dots towards the top and some blue dots near the bottom. And the red dots is movement away from the satellite. I should have drawn your attention to the color scale here. So we're talking about if they're the darker red are more than 4 millimeters per year of movement. So these are small movements. If it's white, then it's stable, to about the 1 millimeter per year level. And the blue is movement towards the satellite. And it's a combination of horizontal and vertical, but you can think of it as vertical in this case. The red is what happens in these landslides is they kind of rotate. So the top of the landslide goes down and the toe of the landslide at the bottom goes up. And again, you can see if we look at some time series, there's some points here. They should pop up. And again, you can see it's not steady in time. You've got some time periods where it's faster than others. But over here, you've got something like 5 centimeters of subsidence over that 6-7 year period. So it's a significant amount of movement. And if you've got a railway track running through here, so there's a lot of mitigation work, a lot of money that Network Rail spend to make sure this railway line can stay open. So we're working with them to, we've looked at comparisons with the ground-based data, and you get a beautiful correlation between the satellite and the ground-based data. They show exactly the same thing. So it's really powerful.
Amazing. So when you say when you say landslide, the first thing that comes to my mind is something you see happening in real time. This is happening in very much in slow motion, but we can see it happening.
Right. A lot of some landslides are kind of catastrophic. You think of the catastrophic cliff collapses and things like that. But actually, a lot of landslides are kind of steady, and they're slowly creeping. That movement, that rate of creep, is kind of often dependent on the weather, the amount of moisture in the soil, and things like that. So that's kind of interesting. Let me show you. If I do that, can you see it's changed to London?
Yes. I can see the there.
So this is a higher resolution data set from one of the commercial satellites. But in this case, where you can see this red line running through the data here. And again, just a few millimeters a year of movement. That's where they've been digging this new super sewer in London. And you can see this underground tunneling. And you can see underneath that tunnel, you've got this, region, very localized region of substance. And if I look at some time series here, again, you can see actually this is slightly noisier data here, but you can see it drops down in around mid 2020, which should have been when the tunnel goes through. And you can use this kind of technology to then kind of map, the progression of the tunneling. You can use it. We've got data showing Crossrail in London and the kind of ongoing settling of the Crossrail signals and things like that. So it's a really powerful data set. Shows so many things. I could talk about it for a long time.
I could totally understand. It's fascinating. I'm absolutely fascinated by that. And it is one of these. It's one of these situations, and it felt very similar with the meteorological company, when you could see there are so many different applications that it's difficult actually. I think the trick is it's almost like a ball of elastic bands. You could sometimes buy them in balls. It's like pulling them out to actually say this is an option and that's an option, and it's making them wowzers. That's
I think it's also our chair. Should I stop sharing? I can show other examples later on, or people always want to have a look at their own house, but you might want to do that when we're offline later on. I can have a look at that.
Don't any shot.
Exactly. I think in general, actually, subsidence for people's houses is a pain, but everyone's home insurance covers it, and so I think normally it's good. Most places aren't subsiding or affected by things. But I think one of the interesting, going back to your point about the multiple applications, that has been one of the challenges. Do we try and focus in on one sector, one kind of vertical, and really understand everything associated with that particular market, or do we spread ourselves in multiple sectors? And our chairman has been very keen on trying to work out what's the sector that's going to make you the most money. You should just focus on that. But actually, it is, partly we don't really, it takes a while to work out what that answer would be. And secondly, I think there's lots of sectors that need and value this data. So I think it's our income is quite spread across multiple sectors. So it's not as easy as saying, yeah, we can just put all our money in the property basket.
No, there's an element of trial, test and measure in this. We probably don't know how valuable it is till we try, but it's very much. I talk to people about target markets, and the idea is, if the whole market, anybody that could use our service is big, if we try to address the whole market at the same time, the message is too dilute in the solution. So it's breaking it up into the smaller sections of that big and saying, for you guys, if you're operating property, this is how we can help you. If you're operating in construction, this is how we. And it's those sorts of things I think that are really key. But then, as you say, until we've actually trialed it, we don't necessarily know. We're only guessing how valuable it is to that marketplace because we don't know their problems. And it's only if we're solving a problem of theirs will they value it. Otherwise, it's interesting information, but it's not valuable information. And I guess that's the challenge we've got to.
And it's also trying to get that. It is hard to get that value because it's hard to. It's also hard to quantify a lot of the savings. So if there's a failure on if some of the big pipeline fails, they can be fined. Just the fines alone can be millions of pounds, and then of course the disruption. If a railway embankment fails and the railway line has to be shut for months, the costs are enormous. But it's quite hard to quantify preventions of those, right? So I think it's probably easier with something like water utilities where they have a lot of failures, so you can actually look at, has this had a measurable impact on the number of failures we're dealing with. Whereas if Network Rail, if hopefully you get to a situation where we've prevented a whole bunch of disasters, landslips or whatever, bridge collapses or whatever, but actually knowing that it's kind of an unknowable number. And so that's always kind of hard to extract cash from people if they don't know. You're saving. It's like an insurance policy, I guess, isn't it? You don't know. You invest, asking them to hand over a payment for something that may benefit them, but they may never know that it's benefited them. It
may be, as an idea, it may be that the insurance industry is a big potential for you guys because they get the idea of risk management.
Absolutely.
We don't have to explain it to them what's the impact, because they're actually monetizing risk. So the end user doesn't, they're either okay or they're not. But they get insurance to cover when they're not. But then that's
we are talking to them, particularly in the home insurance kind of
that makes
market.
Sense.
And we're working with a company who, again, another advantage of technology. If there is a subsidence claim and some remediation work, then sometimes you have to monitor, in some cases for 12 months on the ground. And if you've got the satellite data, you can kind of say we've already got the 12 months monitoring because we can go back 12 months. If you have to put instruments on the ground, you have to wait 12 months. So there's an instant saving there. But I think it's clear to me that the data has a value, and it's just about finding the right people to work out how to integrate it into their workflows. Because at the moment it's very crude. It's about, for subsidence risk, it's about what's your soil type. And often that's done on a postcode level, or even a broader postcode level. Are you near a mine? Things like that. And actually, it doesn't factor in, what is your specific circumstance of your house. It might be, yes, we are on clay soil, but our house has got deeper foundations. Or it miif be that it really matters if your neighbour's got a big tree next to your house that has a really big impact on clay soils, whereas it's very specific to an individual house sometimes, and we can actually give you that house level information. Has your house moved over the past 5 years? And that can be unstable houses in stable areas and stable houses in unstable areas as well. So it can work both ways, I think.
It's the same thing, isn't it? is what's the most valuable thing? Is it a prediction of what might, whether it might move or not, or has it moved? And I guess that's what people want to know, is has it moved recently? And that you know, and that which is what you guys provide. I remember my first business, we were primarily in the power industry. We did a lot of work, and we got involved on using some I think we worked with Manchester University. We were monitoring corrosion in real time, because again it was the lining of the stacks, which was actually titanium. Titanium lines the stack of a power station chimney, which is obviously very expensive, and it's super non-corrodable except to water, funnily enough. So it was actually literally monitoring, but the you know, turning something that typically monitoring corrosion was a visual, a bit like you said, a visual monitoring process, into something which was around, ended up being about the resistance of electrical current across a sample in actually in situ. And just fascinating how you taking something that was a real problem for them, because obviously replacing something so big but so expensive was critical. And it's finding those gems of value, I think, to solve a particular problem. But it's this, you know, very big, we can solve many problems, but it's actually how that relates to you.
Yeah, and it's kind of tying up our data sets to people who need it, and then providing that kind of translation tool in the middle that says, actually, yes, you need it, but you know, you don't need the data, you need the information. And so that's really, I mean, I'm not sure we thought this through completely logically when we came up with the SatSense name, but there's the sense part of it. It's supposed to be, you know, how in the interpretation, how you make sense of the data.
Yes.
As much as here's the data. There's a whole bunch of companies that can provide you the INSAR data, the satellite data, the raw numbers. But actually, we've got some pretty smart tools for actually helping you understand what it means. I think that's what we're trying to do. Absolutely
amazing. So I'm just thinking about yourself as obviously the brains, the research, the academic side, and then the business itself. What percentage of your time, Tim, would you say is spent in you know, running the business, doing the business, and what percentage in the research, the development, the academic side of what you do?
So I'm largely, I'm probably about 1 day a week working with SatSense, and that's a mixture of technical stuff, you know, and it's not so much anymore doing the actual coding. It's more about talking to the guys who are doing the algorithm development and the coding. You know, they have problems. Actually, very much like we work with our PhD students. It's very much R&D. You know, it's have you thought about trying this, or why didn't you do it this way rather than this way? And so there's a lot that we're doing that work. We get involved in bid writing, reporting, that kind of work,
great.
And then there's kind of more strategic stuff. So obviously sitting on the board of directors, working with the CEO, thinking about some of the strategic directions. But also we get, you know, put in front of, we get wheeled out, I think, to talk to clients quite a lot, because they like, we understand the technology, and our CEO is learning about the technology, but he's an engineer by background, but not a satellite specialist. So he kind of knows what it can do, but I think it's when the left field questions come out, you know, oh, have you thought about doing this? Or can you do this? And
can you do that?
Why doesn't it work here? And, you know, and we can think on the fly a little bit in terms of, oh no, we have thought about that. So, you know, it's interesting. Most questions we've thought of the answers, but you do occasionally get kind of left field questions that are actually kind of, oh, that's a good idea. And
absolutely. No, I did wonder. The phrase "wheeled out" actually came to mind, which is interesting. So I mean, I'm really interested then, you know, what is an academic's view of business in general? I mean, it feels like this wasn't your intention to go into this business initially. It was obviously the love of what you do. What's your initial thoughts and feelings and experiences of being involved in a business alongside what you do?
I think for me it came at a good time. I think I've been a professor for, I don't know, when did I become a professor? 2012, I think, and you know, was ready for some new challenges. So I think it's been kind of, you know, something fascinating, sometimes frustrating, but I think in general pretty fascinating watching that process, watching the change in you know, it is different. Now, if I have a PhD student and they've come up to me with a problem, you know, we can work on it as long as we like. We can see, you know, often what happens is they'll show us, we'll have a discussion about something, and we'll want to, you know, we'll see a particular signal and we'll want to go, and that can be months of time from you know, that they go away and investigate that, and sometimes that goes nowhere. Sometimes it leads to something exciting. Whereas with SatSense, obviously, it's much more direct. So, you know, we have a lot of conversations with Carson, who's the technical lead, where we'll say, oh, we really should do this because, you know, we read this paper where somebody's doing it like this, and he's like, yeah, we could do that, but you know, who's going to pay for it? And you know, it's, our clients don't really want that, and it's yeah. So actually getting that can be frustrating, because I think it's, you know, about having, you know, we want to have the best product, but you want to, you know, perfection's the enemy of the really good, or whatever. So it is a fantastic product. It's not yet, you know, it could be better, of course, and we're always working on those improvements. But getting that trade-off, it's very different. You know, you want something, you need something that works. Whereas in academia, if there's a deadline that slips, it doesn't really matter that much for the research. Yeah.
I do understand that, and I think that's the key thing. Is it's that, and I think I was talking to somebody that, you know, Pareto's rule of 80-20, 80% of the value can be delivered with 20% of the effort, and then potentially the last 20% will take 80% more, you know, 80% of the effort, and it's getting that balance, because it's got to work, it's got to deliver, and it can be improved over time. But for a commercial application, I guess it's got to be good enough, not perfect. And
you've got to keep it. Obviously, you're trying to think, the strategic part of us thinking, well, what are we going to be selling in 5 years time, or, you know, even 2 years time, you know, as other people provide, you know, other people kind of catch up with some of the technological advances. Yeah, there are free data sets that are going to be made available that provide similar things in terms of the data products. So that's just kind of partly, you know, that translation engine in the middle that goes from the data to the information. That's, I think, really where the value ultimately will be. I think the data points itself, the technology is great, and we've got a whole bunch of other bits of R&D on different things we can do with the data. But I think it's that translation engine. You know, what does it mean? How do we use this? How do we save a customer money or make a customer more money with our data, or our information, or the information we derive from our data? That's what we're trying to do.
And that's it. If you know, if the answer is nothing, then it has no value. And obviously, it's where it offers maximum value is key. Difficult thing to do, but fascinating.
And I think in terms of I think it's hard. I think just feel like sometimes I have two jobs. You know, I've just stepping down. I've also been chair of governors at a primary school, and you can imagine the amount of effort involved over the pandemic in doing that as well. And it's so sometimes I felt like I had three jobs at various points, but as well as family, etc. So it's can be a bit challenging. So I think getting those trade-offs sorted out. I'm not sure I've got it right yet, and I'm trying to get that work-life balance right, and do stuff. Ultimately, I want to be doing stuff that I enjoy doing, and I enjoy the SatSense work. I think it's great to actually see people using the data. You know, often in the academic world, it's increasingly, the academic world is moving towards what's been called impact, the impact agenda. You know, where you know, it's not good enough for us to do a study on a tectonic fault on a volcano and show that it's dangerous. You know, actually, okay, who's going to use that information? And so we do a lot of work with partners around the world about helping people use the data or work out how to create the data sets themselves and use them in real life situations. But I think it's much more immediate with SatSense. You know, it's okay. Here's a product. This is how, you know, we really think you can use it. And when somebody says yes and they sign on the bottom line, we do that work for them, and it's really it's great.
Absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Well, Tim, it's been really fascinating, and thank you so much for your time, talking about your experiences, but also showing what you guys are doing. And I'm sure there are so many different opportunities. And if somebody wanted to get in touch with you or SatSense to learn more, what would be the best way to do so?
Yeah, if they just go on the website, www.satsense.com, and all the contact information's on there, so they can get in touch that way.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much again, Tim. It's been really fascinating.
Great, thank you.